Lucy, can you see the full screen?
I can, yes.
That's great. Okay, well, it's got to the hour on my clock, so I think we can probably get going. So welcome everybody to this Working Group 4 seminar from the collaboration of Aphasia trialists. And I think Lucy and I, this might be the last talk in the series for this year, honouring the 10-year anniversary of CATS. Most of the working groups have been asked to present a kind of update and progress seminar to honour the work that's been going on across the globe through CATS. So we're delighted to be here to do that with you this morning and tonight and whatever time zone you're in. So my name is Miranda Rose. I'm a professor of speech pathology at La Trobe University in Australia and currently the director of a centre of research excellence called the Aphasia CRE. And Lucy, you might like to introduce yourself.
Thank you. So I'm Professor Lucy Dipper. I'm a clinical linguist and I'm at City University in London.
So we'll tag team a little during this presentation. Lucy and I currently are the lead and co-lead of this working group and been happily doing that now, I think, since March of 2020, weathering the difficult years of COVID lockdowns and the challenge of not being able to meet face-to-face as team members within this working group. But despite those rather significant interruptions, I hope what we're going to present to you tonight demonstrates some of the quite significant progress we've made on our plans. So let's see if I can get this to move forward. Not wanting to move forward. Lucy, what can you see now?
I can see your single first slide.
Yeah, it's just not wanting to move forward for me. There we go. How about that? Can you see that now?
Yeah, that's good.
Thank you. Okay, so just an overview of what we'd like to cover with you in this seminar. First, just briefly what the aims of this working group 4 are and a little bit about our membership. And then we're going to focus down on some of the projects that we've been working on over the last couple of years. So we'll spend some time talking about the Aphasia Therapy Finder. We'll look at what's been going on in some work to do with technology in aphasia rehabilitation, and then a little bit on questions to do with dose and intensity, and then to do with reporting of aphasia rehabilitation research, so the Tidier Aphasia project, which Lucy has been leading. And then we'll finish off with some brief comments about future directions. So what's the overall aim of our working group? It is to conduct international research that maximises the effectiveness of interventions for aphasia. And when Lucy and I took on the leads of this working group, we wanted to make it very clear to our members and to new members that were coming along as well, that we were including this from the point of view of it being all phases of care, so acute, subacute, community rehabilitation and long-term living with aphasia, but also targeting elements across the ICF, so not just focusing on impairments, but also work to do with activity, participation, personal and environmental factors and quality of life and well-being. So that when we're thinking about the effectiveness of interventions, we're thinking very broadly across phases of care and targets. At the moment, we have 44 members in this working group, and they come from 16 different countries. That includes Australia and Brazil, Cyprus and Egypt, Finland and Germany, Greece, Iceland, India, Italy, Mexico, the Netherlands, Norway, Sweden, United Kingdom and the USA. So quite a good spread across the globe. But we're always looking for new members, and we'd be very happy to hear from any of you who might be interested to join our working group, and in particular to get involved in any of the projects that we're talking about tonight or new projects. So let's move on to doing some project updates. So the first one we'll talk about is the Aphasia Therapy Finder. So the Aphasia Therapy Finder is an online tool to bridge the evidence practice gap that most people on this seminar would be well aware of. So that lag between research evidence being published and the clinical implementation of that evidence. So we have a range of collaborators on this team. So myself, Sam Harvey, who at the time early on in this project was the project officer and has now become a more formal collaborator as he's moved on to different roles. Jade Dignam, Melanie Kermis, Lucy Dipper, Evie Vishbrink, Elizabeth Hoover, Sarah Wallace, Bettina Moore and Katie Monley. And so that we've spanned different time zones and many parts of the world, and this has brought great richness to this project. So the background to this project is that we know from research that we've done here in Australia and elsewhere in the world that maintaining current evidence base for aphasia rehabilitation can be really challenging in clinical practice. And that speech pathologists have identified time and a lack of access to clinical resources as being the major barriers to implementing evidence and to overcoming the evidence practice gap. And in a recent survey that we did through the CATS team here, led by Jade Dignam, we saw that speech pathologists really strongly supported the development of digital resources that could help them in selection of evidence-based interventions. So this just really provided a very strong rationale for us in moving forward on the Aphasia Therapy Finder project. So in this project, what we were aiming to do was develop an online repository of resources so that clinicians would be aided in the selection and implementation of the therapies. And I want to call out here very strongly our sincere thanks to the Tavistock Trust for Aphasia, who have really very generously funded this project and enabled us to really make huge progress this year that would not have been possible without their financial support. So we've had a number of design sources for the Aphasia Therapy Finder. The first were some focus groups that we ran in Australia and the United States of speech pathologists, and they told us a lot around how challenging it was for them to keep their evidence base up to date, how they struggled to get access to that evidence at times, but that they had enormous difficulty in finding detailed descriptions, for example, of the therapies that were in some of the research articles, that they really struggled to find any resources that could help them implement this evidence. And the study that Jade led was across 19 countries, involved 176 participants, and included people from developing countries and from countries where English is not the official language. So just making it clear that this is data and sort of reason from a whole range of perspectives. And what those clinicians have told us, both in the focus groups and in the survey work, is that they really wanted to have support to select therapy approaches across the ICF, and that they were interested in resources for culturally and linguistically diverse populations, and that really importantly, they wanted the hands-on stuff. They wanted the video demonstrations of how these interventions are carried out, and the implementation resources to be able to go ahead and do the intervention. For example, picture stimuli that might be used, or other sorts of materials that are required to implement the therapy. In that survey, I mentioned that we had representation from a range of countries, so I'm just sort of providing a little bit more detail there of where those participants came from. So back in 2022, we began developing this tech tool, and as I mentioned, Sam Harvey was the project officer during that period. And we took, just to develop the prototype, we selected 4 evidence-based aphasia therapies to begin this process with. That was script training, semantic feature analysis, communication partner training, and constraint-induced aphasia therapy. And this is what a typical page sort of looks like. We have a title, obviously, of the therapy and how it might be referred to in other ways. And we have a summary statement about what the therapy is. And then we provide quite a lot of detail around what kind of levels of evidence and what type of evidence, where that's come from, and you know, for example, how many participants were studied, what kinds of participants were studied, and then detailed descriptions on how to carry out the therapies in a clinical setting. And if there is in the evidence any consideration for clients that do well with, do better or do less well with the intervention, that kind of detail is also provided. And then any links to materials that are required to enact the therapy. And when we did some pilot work with that first 4 therapies that we loaded up to our system, we had some feedback from clinicians that it was very usable and highly acceptable. So this is just an example of one of the pages where you can see you can go in and search according to the level of evidence or the different ICF domains or the aphasia type, and then the system will bring up any interventions that match your searching criteria. So we're now at the stage of adding a whole lot of other therapies in the second phase, again, very generously funded by the Tavistock Trust for aphasia. So at the moment, Cassie Wilcox is our project officer, and she's been leading the team to include all of these therapies. So I won't read them all out, but we'll soon be at 24 therapies that are sitting on the aphasia therapy finder. And these therapies have at least level 2 evidence for their effectiveness. So what we're hoping is that speech pathologists, researchers, students and other health professionals and families might find the aphasia therapy finder useful. We'll finish our expansion to the 24 therapy approaches by the end of this year. And we're aiming to explore the sustainability plan and report back to the Tavistock Trust about this project early in the new year. And then we'll be able to formally announce how the world can get access to it and where it will be living, for example, where it will be hosted. Going forward, we're interested in doing some cultural and linguistic adaptation on the back of the request from clinicians to include this kind of work. That's another very big project and requires additional supports. And also to look at whether we could develop an aphasia-friendly version, for example, as an advocacy tool for people living with aphasia who want to be more empowered to engage with their clinicians about the choices of the interventions they're receiving. Okay, so that was the aphasia therapy finder. And the next couple of items I'm going to talk about concern the technology in aphasia rehab programs that we have operating within this working group. So we, in this project group were aiming to map current technology use in aphasia research and practice and identify technology-enabled projects that we could take forward and seek funding for and be able to implement. We have a broad range of collaborators in this working group, and we're always looking for more people to join. So one of our major achievements was in June of last year, when we finally, post-COVID or midway through the tails of COVID, were able to meet together for a think tank associated with the International Aphasia Rehab Congress that was held in Philadelphia. And this was just a really fabulous opportunity to get some people together with experience and interest in technology applications to aphasia, and to brainstorm out where the field is at and what we could move forward on. And ahead of that meeting, Rob Kavanagh, John Pearce and myself developed the tech map, which I'll show you in just a moment. And this formed a kind of contextual wallpaper for our think tank in terms of being able to screen what was happening in the world and then start to move forward from that. In that think tank, we developed 3 priorities for moving forward. They were improving aphasia awareness globally, improving website accessibility for people with aphasia, and focusing on self-management strategies that could be tech-enabled. So here's the technology map that I mentioned that we developed ahead of the think tank. It's available through the CATS website. So if you just go to the CATS website, and you'll be able to see a link to the aphasia tech map. And what this is a repository that is being constantly updated, excuse me, by researchers who are undertaking work in research in aphasia rehabilitation that involves tech. So the idea is that if you were interested in developing tech, or you wanted to know what was going on in the world, you would access this map. You can hover over one of these items, and you'll see what comes up is a whole lot of information about projects that are happening in that region. So here is an example where I've hovered over something that was going on in Boston, in the Boston region, and I've got now a description of a particular project, and then I can click on that and it'll take me to a full description of that project, as well as how to get the contact details for the authors. You can also just go into a table format here within the map and search for various things that you're interested in. For example, if you're interested in virtual reality applications, you'd be able to search on that category, and only the projects that are tackling VR would come up. So it's a lovely way for people to find out what's going on in the world, and for other researchers to be able to make contact with people that are researching in their area of interest. It can be automatically updated, so there's a form that you can go to on the tech map, and you can, for example, if you've got a project that you would like to tell the world about in tech, you can just go on and put your details in there, and the website automatically harvests that information and displays it. So it's a kind of hands-off AI-enabled piece of tech, thanks to Rob Kavanagh's amazing coding skills. And another project within the tech space is a survey we have open right now, led by Dr. Sarah Wallace from the University of Pittsburgh. And in this survey, we're looking at what clinicians are saying, what helps and what hinders them in their technology applications in aphasia. So this is a survey that we're hoping to get really broad global data from, and from that then be able to prioritise areas for projects to tackle those barriers and challenges that clinicians have raised. So if you're interested in partaking in that survey, there's a QR code right there, or you can just contact Sarah Wallace at the University of Pittsburgh, and the survey's open until the 15th of December. The technology seminar series will be kicking off in 2024, and Dr. Annie Hill, who works with me at La Trobe University in Australia, has now taken on the lead of these the tech projects, and she'll be getting some seminars going next year. So if you're interested in joining that sort of community practice and sharing information and learning from these people, please just contact Annie and she can make sure you get access to that seminar series. Okay, so we've talked about the Aphasia Therapy Finder. We've done some description of what's happening in the tech space. And now I'd just like to focus on the projects related to dose and intensity. So in these projects, we're aiming to develop a focused and prioritised research agenda that addresses questions concerning dose and schedule for aphasia interventions, and then seek funding to run international trials, high-quality international trials. So essentially, one of the fabulous collaborative advantages of working in an organisation like CATS is that we have the opportunity to really rapidly and significantly increase the N of any study that we're running. One of the challenges of running large-scale randomised controlled trials in aphasia rehabilitation is patient recruitment. And in a country like mine here in Australia, obviously with a population of 25 million, it can take some time to recruit participants that fit the relevant inclusion criteria. So one way that we can get to results more quickly and make trials more viable is to run them from an international perspective. And this is one of the things that's driving the work in this dose and intensity working group at the moment. So what we have sort of used as our base plate is the recent work that was published from the Release Collaboration, which I'm a member of. And that work, led by Marion Brady, was published in the Journal of Stroke last year concerning dose, intensity and frequency of language therapy for aphasia and the impacts of those elements on outcomes. And what's unique about that release work is that the meta-analysis was done on individual participant data, so IPD, rather than just on group level analyses. And so we were very fortunate that there were 959 participants available to analyse from the release work, and they came from 25 different RCTs where speech and language therapy for aphasia had been given. And the sort of summary on this lovely infographic produced by the release group points out that the mixed receptive expressive therapy and functionally tailored with prescribed home practice type of therapy was associated with the greatest overall language gains. And then we can see that dose really does matter. So the best overall language and auditory comprehension gains came from 20 to 50 hours of therapy. The best overall functional communication gains were associated with 4 to 5 days per week, and the best auditory comprehension gains with 3 to 4 days per week. And interestingly, when we look at when things weren't working well in the auditory comprehension domain, gains were not seen at all when therapy was given at less than 3 hours or less than and equal to 3 days per week or less than 20 hours total. And I think when we reflect on so much of clinical practice at the moment, we would see that the clinical practice general regimens sort of are in that domain. So this work is really putting a spotlight on whether we're really giving the most effective doses that we can, and whether at times we're giving doses that are very unlikely to lead to significant neuroplastic change or learning. So with that as the sort of backdrop to our work, we're interested in, first of all, stating that dose and intensity seem to matter. But what we don't know from the release work, because it wasn't designed to give us this information, is, what levels of dose and intensity are best for very specific interventions, and importantly for whom. So are there subgroups of people with aphasia, and their characteristics mean that this type of therapy given at this dose is good, whereas this type of therapy at that dose is not. So trying to get down to a much more specific prescription guideline for people with aphasia. And that's really driving the discussions and planning that we're having in the dose and intensity working group. So far what we've done in this series of projects is to have some team meetings to explore different research approaches to the research questions that we're generating. And we've been working with Professor Amanda Farron from the UK, looking at novel adaptive trial designs, and trying to refine which intervention vehicle we would use to explore some dose work and get a grant application up and running. So what we're trying to do is take a high candidate intervention, that is the one that already has strong phase 3 evidence at a particular dose, and then move it through phases of dose articulation, that is to look at what happens when you range the dose up to a very high level or down to a low level, and then you start screening doses for how effective they are. And then you do that in a very programmatic way. And at our last meeting that we had, a face-to-face meeting in Iceland at the Nordic Aphasia Conference this year, we started to explore whether multimodality aphasia therapy, which has strong phase 3 evidence, would be a good candidate intervention. And essentially that's what the group is sitting with at the moment, and how to design a trial, an international trial of sufficient scale that would enable us to get down to these very specific questions about dose and candidacy. So we're always looking for more people to get involved with this work, and we'd love to hear your thoughts and advice about how to progress this kind of work. Okay, so the next project we'll finish with is Tidier, and Lucy, if you'd like to take us through that, and I've got control here, so you'll have to let me know when you want the slides changed.
Thank you. Okay, so yeah, the Tidier project is targeted at creating a reporting checklist that's going to help us as aphasia intervention researchers in reporting our interventions. So I can see on the call that there's quite a few people who've been involved in creating interventions and reporting them, and then others who obviously have been reading this literature for many years. And our aim as a project group is to improve this reporting for the purpose of all sorts of things. I mean, two main things are to facilitate future research by making things replicable, but also to facilitate some of the things that Miranda's talking about earlier, such as the release project. If there's more detailed reporting in our intervention reporting, then the data that can be pulled out in these meta-analyses increases. And we also want to improve intervention reporting to support implementation. So in a similar way to the Aphasia Therapy Finder, we want more detail about new interventions to be out there ready for clinicians to use. So what we decided to do was to take an existing reporting checklist and adapt it to make it specific for aphasia. So many of you will know the Tidier checklist, which was created by Tammy Hoffman and team in 2014. And their aim was to expand on the reporting guidelines that were already out there. So we have the consort standards for reporting trials, and we have the spirit recommendations for the kind of detail we need in our protocols. And each of them had a single item about intervention reporting. So item 5 on the consort and item 11 on the spirit. And because it was just a single item, there wasn't much detail in there. So Tammy Hoffman and team looked across a whole range of intervention reporting, from the very medical to behavioural, and created this lovely checklist to guide people in how much detail to include about each element of intervention reporting. But because it is for this huge range of interventions, it probably isn't detailed enough for specific groups of intervention, and it doesn't seem to be detailed enough for aphasia intervention reporting. So there's been a number of systematic reviews where people have looked at the level of reporting, and it's just not quite up to standard. So we wanted to take each item on the Tidy checklist and adapt it and expand it and make it specific to aphasia. And in doing that, we wanted to pull out some examples of good reporting practice as well to help guide people. Thank you, Miranda. I'll go to the next slide. Okay, so this is the team, quite a big team. And you can see we span quite a few time zones as well. So we have the tricky task of trying to get a time that suits everybody, which is very difficult at this time of year, much easier the other half of the year. So we've been working on this for a while, but you'll see there's also in this group, there's a range of experience in terms of intervention reporting and working with intervention papers as well, which is quite important for the methodology we're using. So I'll go to the next slide, please, Miranda. So this is an adaptation and consensus process. So we're starting with that team that you've just seen on the previous page, and in there we've got this range of experience. And so we're using the project team as the steering group for how to adapt each item of the checklist. And then we need to share our draft, our suggestions with a wider range of people to get consensus. So we did that in 2 steps. We had 2 consensus meetings open to the full CATS membership, which we ran during some of the CATS online meeting weeks. And so at each of those meetings, we had 15 to 20 people look at our draft adaptations to the checklist and give us feedback. And in both of those meetings, there was full consensus in that group that what we were doing was the right approach and what we were doing was needed. So we took that support and feedback and we adapted the items a bit further. And then this year we put out a survey of the final draft to see what people thought. And we had, again, full consensus on that. So what we'd said ahead of time was we needed 70% of people to say, yes, do this. Yes, this is the right thing that you've done to that item to move on. And we had 85 to 100% consensus for all of the items from the people who responded to the survey. I'll have the next slide, please, Miranda. So we're now at the stage that we've got the draft survey and we're going to be writing up the paper that showed the process that we went through, and we're going to be publishing the new Tidier Aphasia checklist. So this is a reminder for people of what the original Tidier checklist looks like. And then moving on, this is what our adapted aphasia checklist looks like. So the first thing you'll see is our checklist is longer. So, you know, the original was a single sheet and we've gone over that in order to get this level of detail. And if you just click the button again, Miranda, I'm comparing side by side our checklist with the excerpt from the original Tidier so that you can see the expansion. So I suppose a downside to doing this is that our checklist is longer. But obviously we think there's lots of upsides with that. So I'm just going to illustrate a couple of the areas where we've expanded the reporting. So you'll see the original Tidier has got 1, 2, and 3, the name of the intervention, why you would do it, and what you would do. And the first part of what you would do includes materials, where they say describe any materials used in the intervention. So we've gone with the first 2, but we've put some specific questions under why, just to prompt people to think about things that we think are important in aphasia reporting. So what's the intervention aiming to achieve and why? What's the theoretical context or perspective? So this is something not unique to aphasia reporting, but different in aphasia reporting to many other medical intervention reportings. You need that theoretical context to understand why you might use this intervention, and to guide people to say specific things like what's it's expected to achieve and what are the active ingredients. We've also added a new item 3, where we're saying for whom, because we know this is particularly important in aphasia intervention reporting. So if the treatment is designed for a particular subpopulation of people with aphasia, we'd like to have that detail in the reporting. And then we've linked to another project that's happened within the CATS team, which is the Describe checklist for reporting exactly who the people are who've been involved in an intervention. So these two things work side by side. And then even under materials, we've expanded that slightly, and we've made some specific prompts like, you know, can you tell us about materials for treatment and pre-practice, if there's any technology involved, if there's any homework materials, and just to prompt researchers to be as specific as possible. So if I have the next slide, please, Miranda. That's lovely, thank you. So you'll see this is the same for each of the items. We've taken what's in the original tidy and we've expanded it. And what we've tended to do throughout is to create questions to just prompt you to think when you're reporting. So, for example, under the methods for what, it's really important to talk about instructions. So we've asked what intervention instructions were given to participants. Were there any aphasia-friendly explanations? Can you include details of these? And then what feedback was provided? Because we know this is an important active ingredient in the treatment cycle. You know, what you say, what the patient says, what feedback you give, and then what happens next. We know this is important in the intervention behavioural cycle. And then just under who, in the original checklist, it's very brief. It's like, you know, what's the profession involved? And we know that there can be a range of people involved in aphasia interventions, particularly if you're thinking of the whole range of intervention that Miranda stressed at the beginning. So not just impairment-based interventions, but the full range. You could have a whole range of different people involved. So we've included some prompts for what you might want to report there. You know, who were they? Were they professionals? Were they carers or friends or supporters? What kind of training did they have? You know, was any of it co-designed with these people? So we've prompted to get really drilled down into the level of detail that we need. Next slide, please, Miranda. So yeah, there's a bit more detail there about who provided, and then how. So mode of delivery is something that there's quite a bit of aphasia research on. So one-to-one interventions, paired interventions, group interventions, and then more recently technological interventions. And because there's more research on this, because there are more options, you know, this is a prompt to us to really record what's going on. And the next slide, please, Miranda. This is an area where we spent quite a bit of time as a team. So item 7 on the original checklist, item 8 on ours, when and how much. So this is where questions of dose come in. So we spent quite a bit of time thinking about this, consulting people who've been working in this area. Sam Harvey temporarily joined the team to give us some advice about this. And we decided in the end to go with the work that Catherine Hayward and team have done in this area, and really use their terminology. And so instead of just asking about how much, we're drilling down into other aspects of dosage. So we're asking about duration, number of days, number of sessions, number of active episodes, length of treatment, those real subcomponents of dosage, which are important for replication, are important for implementation, but are also going to be really important as we start to do these meta-analyses and really try and compare different interventions against each other and different dosage frameworks against each other, as Miranda mentioned. And then the final One of the final areas we looked at was tailoring, because this is an area where systematic reviews in aphasia have noted that there's very little detail in intervention reporting. There is often tailoring, which has been pre-planned for different types of aphasia profile, and it's generally underreported in the literature. And then the next slide, please, Miranda. And the other area where there's been a lot of work in recent years is about checking fidelity. And so we've added some extra prompts in our checklist to prompt people to really report the level of that detail. So this is about how you, when you tested your intervention, how you planned to check fidelity, and then also reporting the outcome of that. So how are you checking it? Was it with the checklist or with samples of videos, or in another method? And then when you did check it, what did you find? Were a range of clinicians able to stick to the original profile, or were there more adaptation? Okay, next slide, please, Miranda. So that was a very brief run through of the checklist. Obviously, people will want to get their hands on it so that they can go through it in detail and see what we've done. So the plan now is for us as a team to work very hard for this last month of the year and get that paper submitted so that it will be published next year. We're aiming to publish in the Journal of Physiology, because we think that's the journal where most researchers who are reporting interventions will have access. And the paper will be about the process we've been through. It will include those examples of good reporting practice that we've pulled out along the way, and then it will have the tidy aphasia checklist as the appendix. And then we're in discussions with Tammy Hoffman about, where else we might disseminate the checklist once we've got to that stage and people are using it. So our final aim then is that this is going to improve aphasia intervention reporting. It's going to facilitate that replication, implementation, and meta-analysis. And it's also going to help, for example, reviewers when they're looking at articles reporting aphasia interventions, to help them check that level of detail is there. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Lucy. So we're just about at the end of our major talking time, and we're very interested if people have any questions or comments, if they could put them into the Q&A box that's on their screens, and we'll be able to hopefully see those and address them as they come up. But in terms of how we're going forward, obviously most of these projects are still in process, so there's work to be done in 2024 and probably into 2025 to reach the endpoint to some of them. But we'd really like to hope that we can attract some new members to this working group. So if you are currently a member of CATS and not involved in Working Group 4, we'd love to hear from you. If you've joined this seminar and you're not a CATS member, we really encourage you to join CATS. It's a terrific organisation that offers a huge amount of opportunity for information sharing, development and collaboration. So do think about doing that. There might have been a specific project that you heard about tonight that you think that's something you're really passionate about, and there's always room for people to join. So please do contact myself or Lucy about that. And we're also really interested to hear about new projects and ideas. So one of the things that happens, I'm sure you would all know, when you get really busy and you get down deep into projects, you lose the capacity sometimes to stand up and stick your head up and look what's around you. And it's really fabulous when newcomers come into our group and sort of point out an area that really needs addressing, and then we can look at that as a collaboration and see what resources are required to move that forward. So be very happy to hear from people about that. So I think that brings us to the end of our formal presentation. I can see there's a couple of comments in the Q&A. If I can just get out of this screen, I'll be able to get to them. Not sure, Lucy, if you are able to see them.
I can see them, yeah. So we have a question. The first question that came in was about, have we involved participants with aphasia or other consumers in some of the aphasia projects that we've just reported on. So Miranda, do you want to answer that for those first ones?
Sure. So yes, absolutely. So it's really a project by project answer. I think if that's Catherine that might have asked that question. Hello, Catherine.
Yeah.
Fabulous that you joined tonight. I know Catherine well. The intention is very much so, and it's really around the nature of the project and how it's kind of operating. So I think, Catherine, if you're interested in getting involved at all from a consumer perspective on any of this work, we'd love to hear from you. Lucy, I don't know from the specific perspective of Tidia whether you had consumers involved in that work.
I think for Tidia, one of the main consumer groups we were thinking about were clinicians, because we were thinking about the interventions being reported in enough detail that they could implement them. So the survey definitely was targeted at both researchers and clinicians. So they gave us their responses there. And then there were a few clinicians involved in the groups that we had online when we were first drafting the checklist.
Yeah. I can see Robin Gibson has just thanked us for the presentation and looking forward to seeing what comes next. Thanks so much, Robin, and please do get in contact if there's some way you'd like to be more involved. And Kerry has asked, are there projects that combine technology and dose, such as exploring the effect of dose and intensity and use of self-managed therapy apps? So at the moment, our working group doesn't have a specific project that is doing that, but of course there is a number of large-scale pieces of literature and work that's been published in that area. Kerry, I'm not sure if you're across those, but for example, the Big Cactus trial that was led by Rebecca Palmer in the UK used the step-by-step therapy app and looked at its general efficacy at a certain dose. So that was a self-managed period over 6 months where the participants worked on some word retrieval therapy through the step-by-step app, and they had a trained volunteer meeting up with them on a monthly basis to make sure that they were able to engage with the system and were motivated to continue in the therapy and the trial. And there is a little bit of dose-related analysis in that study because not everybody did the same amount. And so we've got some information there about some thresholds, for example, when things perhaps weren't so effective. But it is absolutely ripe for that kind of research question, Kerry, because with the automatic harvesting of usage data that's possible through most of the apps now, it's much easier to get a look at dose and outcomes. And at the moment, Constant Therapy out of the USA is involved in a large-scale clinical trial that's very much exploring the impact of dose. So there's a lot going on in the world, and I think we'll see over the next, I'd say even 3 to 4 years, quite a lot of work coming out that gives us a little bit more window into that. And if that's something you're particularly interested in, Kerry, we'd love to hear from you further. I think that's, oh no, I've got some more. Kerry saying thank you. Yes, Big Cactus trials, wonderful, exciting to hear that this is the right research avenue. I'll be in touch. That's great, Kerry. We'd love to hear from you. Any other questions or comments that the group have? We'll just give you a moment to type them in if you do. Looking like the audience is reasonably quiet, I think, Lucy.
I think so. I think we've given them bucket loads of information and they're probably just processing it all. They might want to go away and think about it and then be in touch.
Yeah, and this seminar has been recorded. So it'll be available on the CAT's website if you wanted to go back and follow up on any of the information that we presented. But yeah. Okay, well, on behalf of Lucy and I, thank you so much for being audience participants for this seminar. We hope it's been of interest to you, and yeah, we do look forward to any further follow-up from you should you wish to. And if nothing else, we wish you a great holiday season, whatever that brings to you, a safe end to the year, and may 2024 bring us peace and goodwill in the world.
Lovely, thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Bye now.